Hi everyone, this is Fionapollo and I'm here to talk about fandoms being weird again. What a surprise. Fandom is a funny thing. It can be both amazing and terrifying no matter what media you enjoy, if you so choose to engage with it. But on the rare occasions, something will come along that really grabs people by the bullhorns and causes a media franchise's following to sometimes eclipse that of the franchise itself. We've seen this happen with a couple of different fandoms at this point, and I've discussed this kind of thing before, albeit not quite the same subject. It was around this time last year actually, when Welcome Home got really popular, but it seems the topic has picked back up again thanks to the release of the Amazing Digital Circus's latest episode. In particular, the fandom expectations and subsequent canon realities surrounding the character Jax seem to have been jostled around a bit. I can't lie and say that the expectations for Jax haven't been interesting. It's almost like people wanted him to display a certain level of emotional depth right from the get-go, but when he didn't, suddenly this was an egregious offense and his character has been completely altered and sacralized from that of the pilot, even though it wasn't. And also, despite the fact that this show is only on the second episode and we still know next to nothing about who these characters actually are or what the digital circus is all about, everything is still a mystery because it's episode 2 and episode 1 was technically the pilot. Anyway, I think people were expecting him to be this cheeky, mischievous but good-hearted character, but instead, as of episode 2, he's consistently been kind of a jerk and being shown to crave excitement in the most extreme way possible, possibly as a method of contrasting the rest of the cast's more peaceful leanings, and yet this has somehow resulted in the court of public opinion on this purple rabbit doing an almost complete 180. And I don't know, it just got me thinking about what the fandom actually expected from this character. Were they expecting the next Tumblr sexy man? Is this an example of media literacy going down the drain? Is it something else altogether? What is it? The story is still unfolding right before us, but it's concerning a little bit that this kind of negative reception is creeping up already for a character we know next to nothing about, which people decided they liked originally. And it really stands in contrast to how people received morally grey characters in the past compared to now. I'm pretty sure that unless a character literally offed another one on screen, the reception was never quite this polarised. It also got me thinking about the whole culture of when fandoms latch onto a particular character and hold them on such a high pedestal, almost to the point of warping them to where fanon no longer reflects canon, and being brought back to canon almost feels like a betrayal of what potential new fans were promised. Like, you know, in the grand scheme of things, this stuff really isn't life or death or anything like that, but it is pretty intriguing, so what can we do about that except talk about it, eh? This isn't going to be an episode analysis, nor is it going to be a rehash of the last time I spoke about a similar topic. Today, I want to discuss when fandom expectations eclipse the actual show's canon and end up clashing with it, resulting in this kind of weird backlash effect that we're seeing with Jax. I want to go into when a franchise gets popular, the fandom explosion that follows, and how this places certain aspects of a story, particularly the characters, in such high esteem that 95% of the time, they are doomed to fall from because of how high those expectations become, to the point where it's almost impossible to meet them and they are almost doomed to fail. If you go against fandom and make them problematic, they become hated right off the bat, but if you do exactly what the fandom wants, the character often comes out feeling flat and lacking significant depth. And it's this tricky tightrope that many media properties need to walk, and it's a particularly precarious one for indie productions, such as the Amazing Digital Circus. And Digital Circus is one of the big ones, so it'll probably be fine, which really puts it into perspective how precarious this can be and how vital fan reception can be for smaller properties. Please note that a lot of what I say in my videos is purely speculative and not based in fact unless evidence is given to state otherwise, and if you enjoy what I have to say, then please consider liking and subscribing and sharing your own thoughts on the topic. I talk a lot about animation, internet culture and fandom, so please consider sticking around if any of that strikes your fancy. Alright, let's get started. So I want to take you all back in time to when a certain other huge fandom that is still talked about to this day had taken the entire internet by storm, resulting in a gigantic fanbase and fandom culture to engulf it. This game, like Digital Circus, had humble beginnings from someone who enjoyed creating and wanted to further that enjoyment with a passion project that ended up becoming highly anticipated and subsequently met those anticipations with something that resonated with thousands, if not millions of people and eclipsed that of its own origins. In 2016, a little indie game called Undertale was released.
Created by Toby Fox. Can't believe I edited his name out, I need sleep.
Its creator unaware of just how big its impact would be in years to come, not only within the indie game scene, but also in creating a new pillar of online fandom community. Undertale is probably the biggest example I can give of what I'm trying to explain here that people will likely remember seeing happen in real time. As many of you will no doubt be aware of, Undertale was an overwhelmingly successful game, and that was due to a variety of reasons. For one thing, he was one of the many musical minds creating scores for the webcomic Homestuck, which which at the time of Undertale's release was inching its way towards its ending, and at its peak of popularity, Homestuck had about 1 million visitors per day on its website. Not only that, but Undertale also had a complete story with no need for DLC, which was very appealing, lots of discoverable facts and tidbits, great humour, hard-hitting emotional beats, and so much else that brought the whole thing together into a perfect package. It's no surprise really that the game got popular, but for a fandom to really take off, what ends up being a hook for people is often the characters. And Undertale had a pretty fantastic roster of them. You had Frisk, the silent but intriguing protagonist full of determination, Undyne, the intense and ambitious fighter who was loyal to a fault, Metaton, the flashy, fabulous, and murderous robot, and so many more that had their own distinctive personalities and interesting things about them. None of them felt flat, they were all interesting, well-designed, funny, and almost every single one more or less had a fandom all their own. Which, talking of fandom, Undertale is also probably one of the best examples of having fandoms within a fandom. Alternate universes are also a huge thing in fan communities where people like to create their own retellings using the characters, and this in itself is such a fantastic hotspot for creativity. Like in Undertale, you have offshoots of the main premise, but with something else added in that really sets it apart and changes the whole viewpoint of the original settings and characters. Popular and well-known AUs include the likes of Underfell, Undertale Yellow, Flowerfell, Glitchtip. Anyway, going back to the characters. Just thinking about it, that might be one of the reasons many people, myself included, are drawing parallels between Undertale and Digital Circus. Each character in both franchises are so varied both visually and in personality that it makes them distinctive and very easy for anyone to pick one as their favourite. And with Undertale in particular, no other character reached a truly immense height of popularity quite like the iconic Bag of Bones himself. Looking back, it was actually quite insane just how popular of a character Sans actually was. It still is actually. He still gets a lot of fan art and fanfic created about him. There is quite frankly an insane amount of Sans X-Reader fanfiction, way more shipping than I was ever prepared to see, which involved every character, and I mean every character. And of course, we can't forget the mountain of not safe for work pieces made of a skeleton that canonically does not have that anatomy for what they were doing to that poor guy. That of course didn't stop them, and it seems that people can truly be creative in every way if they're motivated enough. And boy were they motivated. He even became one of the beneficiaries of the coveted and honorary title of Tumblr Sexy Man, alongside the Wansler and that weird clock thing from Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Truly a stellar line of bachelors, and as a result that popularity came with a couple of issues, one of which is the aforementioned issue of sexualizing certain characters. This was something I touched on last year with Welcome Home, and it's something that feels particularly off-putting when it's to do with a property created by a single person. The amount of people sexualizing Wally from Welcome Home, a 3-foot-tall puppet meant to be reminiscent of a Sesame Street character, was just absolutely wild. There will always be a section of fandom which is just nothing but NSFW and sexy works. That's just the nature of the internet, unfortunately. But when that's the only thing you create for a fandom, especially a small one that may not have much else to show fandom-wise that allows others to become interested in it, I don't know, that doesn't really feel great to think about. Especially with Undertale, because really? A skeleton? But yeah, I digress with that. So we've had this discussion before about how fandom has its good and bad parts, and for however many people exist within a community, there will always be about 1 to 5% that are decidedly not the best people to be around or exposed to. And unfortunately, Undertale suffered from that a lot due to the sheer volume of fans the fandom gathered by virtue of existing as a popular piece of media with compelling characters. It wasn't unique to this fandom in particular. There are a lot of fandoms with bad apples in the bunch, and with Undertale's supersonic launch into becoming a huge online presence, that felt pretty inevitable. So yeah, Undertale had this kind of seismic impact on internet culture from its release that directly resulted in a massive intrigue into all kinds of fandom interpretations for all the characters, in addition to this being carried across ever since when looking at other fandoms and series as well. But this unfortunately meant that people came to expect the same level of character depth from other franchises that maybe didn't have the same intentions as what Undertale had, or were properties that just weren't quite that ambitious. And when certain properties couldn't live up to those expectations placed upon them, especially when the projects they stem from are decidedly much smaller in scale with a lower threshold for popularity and ability to push back against those bad apples, this ended up having some unfortunate consequences. So when posting a teaser towards the video topic to you all, I asked this question. What do Jax from Digital Circus and the game Dream Daddy, released in 2017, have in common? And you know what? There were some good answers. Some of you even nearly convinced me that Michael Kovac had voiced a character in that game, which he didn't, by the way. But the link between them is actually that they were highly anticipated, but then for some reason, they didn't quite match up to the fandom's expectations and immediately garnered an opposition that vehemently did not like them. Jax's situation is still developing, but in Dream Dream Daddy's case, this ended up being really tragic. What happened was a fan managed to get hold of screenshots relating to an unused ending found within the game's files. According to the Gaming Urban Legends wiki, the screenshots of the ending itself indicate that the level reveals that one of the game's many dateable dads, Joseph Christiansen, is actually the leader of an ostensibly satanic cult. Hypotheses immediately started forming among the fandom regarding why the ending was cut if it was ostensibly finished. Some claimed that the ending was to be included as part of a Halloween update or DLC purchase. Eventually, numerous fans managed to collaborate on an unofficial recreation of the secret ending by ripping unused sprites of Joseph and other characters in cult-like robes, all put together in a visual novel program called Renpai. The cult ending sparked controversy among fans, some claiming that it's biphobic for demonizing a bisexual character. This enraged people and caused a very negative effect on how people viewed that particular character and pulled the developer's original intentions into the fold, which then brought on an onslaught of criticism that more or less engulfed the entire game, which had nowhere near the amount of popularity to help it weather the storm as something like Undertale could. So it just fell off. The well got poisoned and people stopped wanting to engage with it, which was honestly such a big loss because you could tell this game was made with love and was paved with good intentions. It came out only 2 years after gay marriage had been legalized in all 50 states in America, and it was very trans-inclusive, both in the romanceable dad characters themselves, as well as the player character who you could not only get to choose if they were trans or not, but you also had enough context clues to be able to interpret whether they gave birth to your in-game kid or adopted her. And I think what's most upsetting about this is that if that ending hadn't been found, and if the game had managed to ride the wave for just a bit longer, there probably would have been a seasonal release or something where we would have gotten to see the characters within different scenarios outside of the main game, and not necessarily the one that was found by fans. One big issue with things like that though is that with media that focuses so intently on queer themes in particular, we have this issue of wanting that piece of media to be perfect so that there is as little for non-queer people to pick apart and attack as possible, but instead we end up tearing these properties apart ourselves for not being the pinnacle of perfect representation. This has somewhat lessened in the last 10 years as more queer characters and storylines have emerged, especially in mainstream entertainment thanks to streaming services like Netflix. But yeah, it was quite a serious issue that didn't happen all that long ago. And the issue I feel it raised with that situation is that people from the outside looking in may have been led to believe that the game Dream Daddy was a horrendous example of queer representation, even though it wasn't, purely because people reacted so strongly. You'd be surprised just how many people get their first exposure to a series or property through the internet, especially in fandom spaces, but if most of that fandom reaction is negative, it can be highly discouraging. And in terms of character interpretations, this is where things can especially go a bit awry. If we go back to what I mentioned about AUs in Undertale, the characters will often have some of their traits adapted to fit the rules of that universe to make the story feel more coherent. But a big thing with this, and also fandom outside of AUs, is that if the fandom is big enough, it can have this effect where it can warp people's perceptions of what the character is actually like in canon, and it can even affect the expectations of people outside of the fandom who see all of these AUs and maybe want to actually look into the original property, but then experience a kind of whiplash effect from just how different the canon and fanon characters actually are, often to the point where they are more or less separate entities. So why is all of this relevant to fandom expectations and digital circus? Well, I guess it just came to mind when I started to see just how negatively people started to view Jax, when the novelty of the pilot wore off and people began to realize, oh, Jax is in fact not a very nice character. He's not some naive jester, he's not secretly caring or lonely or depressed that we know of. Again, this is only episode 2, and he's likely going to become even more of a prick as the show goes on. Gooseworks even confirmed that. I'm actually very glad Goose is sticking to their guns with Jax's characterization as well. And let's face it, for something as big as Digital Circus, this probably won't have a lasting effect on the show's overall reception. Episode 2 still garnered millions of views, and the series even had a store open up in Tokyo recently, for God's sake. For other projects though, it definitely isn't as simple as tuning out a couple of annoying voices. From around the time when online fandoms began to have a bigger influence on how certain series and narratives play out, this seems to have given audiences the impression that they can get what they want by kicking up enough of a fuss, where they're essentially bullying the crew and creators into submission, which sucks because sometimes it works. It's been working more and more as the years go on actually, and the thing with that is that it just sets a pretty bad precedent for how fans think they should behave. And couple that with the idea going around lately that post-2020, people have become generally a lot meaner online thanks to internet culture being people's main link to the outside world during things like lockdown. It just feels like this is going to be a huge pain in the neck for smaller and younger projects that are more vulnerable to dogpiling and the like. It's also not lost on me that both situations with Dream Daddy and Digital Circus occurred very early on. The Joseph cult controversy happened a short while after the game was released, and as I keep saying with Digital Circus, we are on episode 2. It's upsetting, it's annoying, and it's also just generally weird to see how invested people get when it comes to hating on things instead of sticking to the shit you enjoy. Like, why is it so hard to scroll past if you don't like something? It's only going to pop up on your feed even more if you engage with it. Just allow the series to have some breathing room and take your time to let things sink in before charging in guns a-blazing about all of its flaws, which are likely being magnified and probably aren't even that big of a deal. That's how I tend to look at things anyway. But unfortunately with that, you can't really control other people's reactions to stuff. You can only watch, learn, and hopefully adapt. Do I think this situation is going to majorly affect Digital Circus or Jax's popularity? Absolutely not. It's a minor thing that took a few people by surprise, but once people have a chance to engage with more of the story and grow to understand the character's personality and goals within the narrative, I think things will level out and Jax may well still be a fan fave. We'll just have to wait and see what the show has in store. Do I think this is a serious issue that must be addressed and squashed before things spiral out of control and fandoms dictate all of the entertainment sphere? Again, no. Because that's never going to happen. I hate to say it, but people don't actually listen to their fans as much as we might think. If someone has a vision for how they want something to play out, especially in regards to a project that has already been more or less completed, mind you, that's how they're going to do it. And it often takes a pretty significant fuck up on their part and or pushback from fans to actually see something be substantially altered, because that's going to take a lot of time and effort to do. Even with an increased amount of negativity online, and even if there may be some comments or complaints about it, because believe it or not, people are allowed to be upset if people are being mean to them and vent about it. Creators do in fact know what they're doing, but more than anything, don't let internet outrage dictate how you view a certain franchise or project. Just check it out for yourself. And I think that's all from me, folks. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you liked what I had to say, please consider liking and subscribing. I definitely don't think that what I'm discussing here is a humongous issue in the grand scheme of things. There are lots of other factors at play that come into whether stuff like a media franchise or indie game, for example, will survive online. I just really enjoy looking into fandom psychology surrounding different things to try and understand it, and also to maybe catch on to any patterns or trends that seem to be emerging. Behaviours in niche communities can just be really fascinating, you know? Sorry. I just realised that sounds like I'm observing creatures in a zoo or something. But anyway, I hope you at least found something of value in what I talk about today. I had some difficulty coming up with topics last week, and now all of a sudden I have about 4 or 5. So depending on how much time I can dedicate to them, there may be some weeks where we get an essay video on Saturday and then an indie highlight on Sunday, which by the way, I've been spotlighting different indie projects through YouTube Shorts the last few weeks, so please check them out. There are some amazing projects being made if you want something other than the big boys like Has Been Hotel and Digital Circus to look forward to. I've also been busy lately because I'm a cat mum now. Here she is. Her name is Olive, full name Olivia Hooberstank, and I would actually kill for her. Yep. I would kill for this cat. Alright, I think I'm done. Stay safe everyone, and I will hopefully speak to you all very soon. Bye!